How contemporary is ancient history? Well, that is the question. Most of you probably answer not much, and not surprisingly, the Britannica dictionary defines ancient as very, very old. And learning this very old history may seem like a daunting task. One may become very easily flooded with the sheer amount of dates and information, all seemingly so alien to the world known to us. However, history does not have to look this way, because history, in its essence, is a subject dedicated to studying the adventures of common people through the ages. Common people who were not all like mighty Lysander, heroic Leonidas, brilliant Themistocles, cunning Pericles, or the ever victorious Alexander of Macedon. Those were common people who lived, laughed, and cried just the way as we do today. So the goal of my today's speech will be to show you how the everyday traditions of these common people resonate through the ages, and how the mere way in which a party was organized was able to influence the face of entire ancient culture. Though you may deny it, most of you have been to a party. Let me assure you that is nothing new to humanity. The most prestigious social events in ancient Greece were symposia, parties organized by rich citizens for their closest associates. Now, if I were to ask, who designs the various means of entertainment during a party? You will probably answer the host. Well, the Greeks had a different view on that topic. The host provided a jolly fellowship with room, food and drink, but the various means of entertainment were designed by another colleague, the party manager, also called the Symposium, and he had a very significant role to play. He carefully dosed out the wine, picking its proportions with the water, because Greeks never drank undiluted alcohol. They consider such behavior to be utterly barbaric. Well, I guess that will make most of you barbarians, but do not be daunted. You will hear that a lot from our Greek friends today. So back to the symposia. As you may imagine, the proportions of wine with water steadily increased as the party went on, adding to the atmosphere. But the mere presence of alcohol was not what made symposia so special. Symposia offered a unique opportunity for the Greek elite to discuss politics, philosophy, make marriage proposals, or even conspire to overthrow democracy. And I'm not making that one up. It actually happened. However, there's also one aspect of the symposia that I would like to particularly focus on today, and those are arcade games. An important role during the symposia was played by the chalice. Does everybody here know what a chalice is? Well, a chalice is the fancy word for a glass of wine, as visible here on the left. However, Greeks also used cups, as here seen on the right. So, imagine that there is only one chalice for the entire party. Each of the guests took turns taking a sip from the chalice and then being challenged by a symposia to do a certain task. Let's take the game of Kotabos as an example. Here we see the ancient portrayal of the game and my more modern interpretation. During the game of Kotabos, the one challenged aimed to sink little terracotta ships swimming in a larger vase by using his chalice as a catapult. Now, instead of the game of Kotabos, the guest could instead be assigned a large flat vase to drink from. And so his only task was to drink without spilling anything on himself or on the floor. However, a more creative symposiac could order the guests to express their opinions about a particular topic. But to make it more interesting, they had to do it in a certain poetic style. Now imagine the host of a party walking up to you with a glass of wine and saying, "Tell me, what do you think about the latest elections, Shakespeare style, or Polish Alexandrine, like in Pantadeusz?" Well, that would be something, wouldn't it? It was just an integral part of entertainment during their parties. Instead of simple commentary, they could also be challenged to recite a poem. The less ambitious minds probably memorized a few lines from Homer just for this occasion, but the more ambitious ambitious and bright ones were able to entire verses on the very spot. And to this day, we find inscriptions of more interesting poems composed this way. Now, stand-up performances were not enough for many. Greeks went as far as to roasting each other on the parties. To do so, they used the most interesting of the challenges, called the duel. During such a duel, the one currently in possession of the chalice had to stand up and challenge any other guest by composing a witty and, may I say, a bit malicious poem about the personal traits or endeavors. Now, the challenged one had to stand up and reply in the same manner. You may ask, why was this most challenging of all tasks? After all, offending your friends seems like a pretty easy task. Now, it required both parties to have a very good understanding of what is appropriate and what is not, because the line between a good joke and an unforgivable offense is usually pretty thin. If you are in a mood of having a good roasting sessions with your friends, remember that you're not original at all. Greeks were doing the same over 2,500 years ago. As you may imagine, the winner of these competitions could expect a little something at the end, as a sign of respect for their endurance and their wits, together with entertainment, because let's be honest, who would not love seeing your best friend spill wine all over his brand new white cloak and fueling the spirit of competition? Actually, there's a pretty funny story concerning that one. During one of his many campaigns, Alexander the Great organized a symposium for his officers to raise them a bit. However, during the game of Kotabos, the officers got so desperate to win the monarch's attention, there were numerous fatal injuries on the party. So back to the roles of the symposium. Apart from entertainment and fueling the spirit of competition, symposiums tested the Greeks' man's ability to live in a society. They required one to show physical endurance, mastery of all forms of arts, and good manners, all put to test by the increasing amounts of alcohol consumed. This is best shown by the nasty comments competition. One had to compose a short and funny poem by combining his knowledge about his friend, his sense of humor, and some artistic abilities, while not crossing some lines and combating increasing intoxication. Symposias tested whether you are a fine Greek citizen or a shameless barbarian getting blackout drunk. Now, a bit referencing the previous speaker, did everyone here read Romeo and Juliet? Well, I suppose most of you did. Do you remember the late night serenade of Romeo under Juliet's balcony? Shakespeare did not invent that scene. It is at least as old as the symposias are. During the later stages of the parties, when many of the guests were getting too tired for more games, one could come up with the idea of paying a visit to one of his other friends' love interest. As you may imagine, the opinion of the one actually in love rarely mattered. What mattered was the excitement of the group to have a few more laughs that night. So the jolly fellowship stands up, goes out into the town, probably waking the whole neighborhood in the process, and then forces a little lovebird to recite a romantic little something behind the closed doors of his love interest's house. However, that was actually the only way to get free-born Greek women involved in the parties. As it was with many areas of life in ancient Greece, it was reserved only for male citizens. Any self-respecting father would be outraged by the mere idea of his daughter participating in such a symposium. This is once again best portrayed by an anecdote. Once, in a Greek town in Sicily, a Greek nobleman invited Roman authorities for a symposium. After a few drinks, the Romans asked to see the host's daughter, renowned for her beauty. Of course, the Greek man refused, because that would shame the honor of his only child. But the Romans were insisting, and soon a fight broke out, resulting in the death of a bystanding slave. Now, this short story shows how differences in drinking cultures may lead to fatal injuries. Also, how stubborn the Greeks were not to allow any women into the exclusively male parties. However, as per men, there was no age limit for participating in the symposia. Plato even placed one of his most famous dialogues during one such party. However, the ones organized by the youngest citizens were renowned and criticized for their excesses. There is a legend about one house, I think in Syracuse. Once a group of youngsters were having a symposium, and after having too many drinks, they started to believe that they were aboard a sinking ship. And of course, the only way to save such a sinking vessel is to get rid of all the unnecessary stuff on board. So they quickly took up all the furnitures out to the street, making a hell lot of a noise. They were so loud that the local authorities had to intervene. Fortunately, the youngsters were so clever that when the mayor arrived with his staff, they greeted him as a god, coming to the rescue of sailors in need. The mayor was capable of recognizing a good joke, so the youngsters were left off with a warning. However, not always such excesses were left without a punishment. Tell me now, whose quote is it? The children now love luxury. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of actions. Children are tyrants, not servants of the households. They no longer rise when their elders enter the room. They contradict parents, chatter before company, gobble up dainties at the table, cross their legs, and tyrannize over the teachers. Who said that? No, it is not your father, nor your head teacher. It is Socrates, at least according to Plato. And this one, in today's youth, I doubt the future of civilization, none other than Aristotle. Probably the complaints of the elders about the behavior of the youth are going to continue until the end of the world and one day after. But fortunately, our civilization has not yet ended. I hope my today's speech make you a bit more comfortable with ancient history. After all, history in its entirety is comprised of pretty short and usually pretty funny stories. Today we saw how a party was in fact a social test in disguise, how vicious the competition at the symposium was, how drunk texting was invented in 5th century before Christ, and how only barbarians drank undiluted alcohol. I hope also it made you a bit more comfortable with your own doings, now seeing that behind those stone-cold marble statues are men and partially women who lived, laughed and cried, were lovers, drinkers, jokers, and above all, liked to have a little fun from time to time. So, before our generation becomes a page in history books, enjoy your symposiums and remember, do not be barbarians. Thank you.